Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We have been recording our brains out the past 2 weeks, putting together our brand new INFx Empowered program. And today on the podcast, we have been having some conversations offline of some of the personal growth ahas that we have been getting by putting this program together. And we thought, you know what, this program's for INFJs and INFPs, but we have so many more types in our audience. You listening may not be an INFP or INFJ. And we'd hate for you to miss out on some of the ahas and some of the really big insights that we've been personally taking from working and developing this program.
So the INFx Empowered program is very similar to the INTx Unleashed program that we created a couple years ago. It's primarily an interview series with a group that we call the Council, which are 3 high-performing INFJs and 3 high-performing INFPs. And what we did before we started creating the program is we took a survey of INFPs and INFJs in our audience and asked them what some of their biggest challenges were. And we've had these surveys running for years. We have them for pretty much every personality type. And so we've ended up getting thousands of responses back. And so we compiled these survey results into a top 10 list of challenges that were reported from INFPs and INFJs. That top 10 list was finding purpose, establishing boundaries, overcoming indecision, feeling judged, simultaneously desiring and fearing intimacy, time management, lacking assertiveness, lacking motivation, anxiety, and making money or being financially valued. So as we interviewed all 6 of these council members, we put a lot of emphasis on asking questions around how they figured out ways to overcome those challenges. And so we won't go through all of those because those aren't challenges that every type faces. But what happened is, even though neither Joel or I, neither of us is an INFP or an INFJ. I'm an ENTP and Joel's an ENFP. There were still a lot of things that were said that were really, they really struck us. There were components in there and ideas and concepts, thoughts and reframes that we came away with that we thought were very powerful. So we just want to give what we think is each of us our top number one thing we noticed about, first of all, about INFPs and INFJs in this council. And then the top thing that we learned, like our takeaway. Even though we're not one of these 2 types, we still got something like a souvenir from this program that we're taking away and we're implementing in our lives.
So one of the things I noticed, these different council members are all dealing with different topics on that list you mentioned, Antonia. So each of them speaks to one or more of those elements, and not all of them cover all 10 of those issues, right? So the thing I noticed was it didn't matter which of the issues was being talked about by all 6 council members. The core emotion, there's an underpinning of a core emotion that ran through all the interviews, and that was anger. Anger came up over and over and over again, and it was particularly tied to this idea of permission. So this emotion of anger combined with permission as a theme began to emerge in most of the interviews, where we would talk about how did you make this change? How did you access the healing? How did you drive the achievement? How did you reconcile this from your past? Various issues all over the board. And the thing that kept coming back to, anger helped me get permission to create the boundaries, to confront the people, to set up the circumstances, to achieve the goals. Anger was an underpinning emotion in all of it. I thought that was a little surprising. I didn't expect that to be so key to everybody's personal growth journey and what they used as almost a launching pad for big change in their lives.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about anger, and particularly for somebody like me, I hate the feeling of anger, but I know that it's an emotion I run to when I'm feeling impotent, when I'm feeling like I don't have any power. I think anger gives us a feeling of power, at least in the moment, because I think what usually undergirds anger is things like sadness. Feelings that are valid and should be addressed and acknowledged and be allowed to be felt, but like sadness feels like it takes the legs out from under you. It feels like there's no power to sadness. You just are sad and you just have to process it. But when you've got something that is making you sad but needs a change, it's hard to use an emotion like sadness to get you going in the right direction, to have that steam behind you to make the changes you need to make. And so I feel like the emotional theme of anger, not every single interview specifically talked about anger, but it came up a lot. And most of the time, like you mentioned, anger was this catalyst to encourage the individual to do what needed to be done. Sometimes it was to make a huge change in their life. Sometimes it was to remember how important it is to fight for yourself and to fight for your interests, and that you have a right to serve your interests. And sometimes it was just they came out of the hatch angry. They were just angry at everything and everyone and fighting all the time. And they learned to amalgamate that anger into an energy that could be poured into something that wasn't quite as punishing for them and for other people. One of the interviewees, one of the council members said, well, anger is just energy, isn't it? Right? And as soon as I figured out that it was just energy that was happening, I was able to transform it into something that really put me on my path. And so I think that, noticing that detail and the takeaway that I got is that it's easy for me, particularly somebody who doesn't have introverted feeling and doesn't particularly like a lot of the intense emotions that feel like they overwhelm me. I think what I really came away with was this idea that all of the emotions serve us in some capacity. It's a matter of understanding why they're there, why they need attention, and how I can transform the energy behind the emotion once the emotion is processed. I can transform the energy into something that serves me, into something that helps me get to the next level, or reminds me of something I've forgotten, like my interests are important too, or I need to be serving myself here. I need to fight for me in this moment, because otherwise, if I don't fight for me, there's no certainty or guarantee that anybody else is going to fight for me either.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, Cheris in her interview, INFJ Cheris, talks about how it was easy for her to perspective shift into people who have, quote unquote, wronged her in her life, and to see, oh, well, of course they did that, because this is the place they were coming from at that time. And it was through allowing herself to get angry to say, you know what, it was a perspective that I can find for that person who wronged me in my life, and I still have the right, and I probably need to be healthily angry about those things that happened to me to fully heal from them. Because if I keep just perspective shifting away from it, I'll never actually deal with the trauma that I experienced from this person. So while I'm quick to forgive, or I have been quick to forgive, she talks about, so much in my past, I'm learning that forgiveness is a process, and anger is part of that. I have to be angry and be upset about the boundaries that were crossed, or the things that were taken from me, or the trauma that happened, in order to process them fully, because otherwise I just keep delaying the inevitable. I keep deferring what needs to happen as far as the emotional processing of these. So that's just an example of how it came up, for example, in conversation. And again, it's not throughout all the interviews. It's not like that's the main theme in all the interviews. It's just something that bubbled up here and now throughout all the conversations. And I was like, this is something very interesting that all INFs in these interviews, INFPs and INFJs, are talking about how anger was so useful for them in their healing process and their achievement process to become the versions of themselves that they are today.
Yeah, a couple times it seemed like anger was how they found themselves on the map, right? One of the people we interviewed, Betsy, talks about how she had to find herself on the map. And anger seemed to be part of how she even discovered where she was. Like, she was there. She was a person. She had self-interest. She had things that she had something she wanted to bring to the world, and she had preferences that she wanted to assert. And so anger was part of how she found herself. And I would have before thought that was not very healthy, that anger, that you can't have like healthy anger, probably because I was raised with, parents that had some anger management issues. So anger always seemed like a tool or a weapon to be used against other people. But I think that the way they described anger, and the big aha that I got from it, is that it actually is closer to a tool than a weapon. Like, just because anger had been weaponized in my experience doesn't mean that it's not a tool that has, legitimate applications, things that it does for a person. And sometimes it's that righteous anger, the righteous anger to find yourself in all of it and to calibrate to what's going on for you. And anger is the one time for some people that they shut off that perpetual compassion or that perpetual sort of deference to other people's preferences. Anger is sometimes one of the only emotions that allows them to cut off the autoresponder that's been programmed inside of them to always defer to other people's interests. Anger can be almost like a cord cutting facility in that moment. And that doesn't mean that you walk your, nobody in any of these interviews said that they stayed there. Like, anger was something that served them for a moment, for a time. It wasn't something that they felt was, that wasn't their number one tool in their toolbox. But it was something that they leaned on when they needed to. And I did get definitely a reframe around anger. The thing that I noticed was how much patience and forgiveness of themselves each council member showed up with. I think that, and every single person talked about presence work. I mean, I think presence work and mindfulness, like, that's kind of the spiritual diet du jour. You know how we go through like different, diet fads. For a while there, it was fat-free, and then it was like, no, fat-free is terrible. And then it went on to, just only eat like an Atkins diet, no carbs. And then it was like, no, it's actually more like a keto thing. And no, it's like a, intermittent fasting. Like, when it comes to our bodies, the more we understand, the more technologies, what we understand about the body as a machine, our diets change to accommodate the new information. And I feel like when it comes to spiritual hygiene or soul hygiene and soul diets, there's been one theme that's consistent throughout all of time. It's one thing that never changes. Just like when it comes to fad diets for the body, the one thing that never changes is that you need to eat your vegetables. Like, you need nutrient-dense foods. And however you choose to do that, make sure you eat your vegetables. Make sure you eat your vegetables the diet for your soul is presence work. It's being present and mindful. And every single person just reiterated the importance of that. But what it gave them, I thought, what was so interesting is a twofold relationship with themselves. That on the one hand, as I mentioned, was patience and forgiveness of the self. There was so much patience that each person had cultivated to not let the world rush them, to let themselves hear their inner voice, to trust their own intuition and decision-making, to really basically be present with the self, and then forgive the self for mistakes that dealt with overcoming perfectionism. It dealt with overcoming, like the mistakes of the past. It helped them rest into, the self-trust that removes anxiety, all sorts of stuff, which was really great. But what it didn't do was have them cut themselves slack on their purpose. So what presence did is it gave them an ability to let go of energy-hogging experiences like beating yourself up and having self-criticism. Like anything that would rob you of your energy, your emotional and psychological real estate. Energy sucks, just going towards beating yourself up and perfectionism and self-criticism and all that stuff. And then because they had recouped that, then they transformed that energy into purpose. And what Annie, one of the people we interviewed, called her dharma. She's like, if you recoup all of that emotional real estate and pour it into being aligned with your purpose or your dharma, she mentioned it's like becoming a laser that cuts diamonds as opposed to, just a standard light bulb that is a diffused energy. And so in some ways, that presence work had helped all the council members cut themselves a lot of slack. But in other ways, they weren't cutting themselves slack at all. They were all on purpose. And in that way, they give themselves no quarter because they were going to be aligned with their purpose. And of course, they talked about ways to find purpose and algorithms and rubrics for finding purpose and that sort of thing, which was really cool too. But I liked that cutting yourself slack in one way is not the same as cutting yourself slack in other ways. It's contextual. It's not like you just roll over and give up, right? When you're cutting yourself slack when it comes to things like perfectionism, I think a lot of people use that, and I think I've used it in the past too, as a way to stay disciplined, as if the voice inside that beats you up when you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing is somehow the fire in your belly to get things done. But it might be a situation of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Like the energy that is being lost in all of that inner antagonism, it might be part of the steam that gets you going, but you're losing so much in the process. So if you can find ways to take that self-discipline and not make it self-criticism, but take it and apply it to the things that are meaningful to you, something that something that you really feel is maybe why you're on the planet to begin with, then you aren't cutting yourself slack. You are fully aligned on your purpose, and you get to take all of that energy and just blast your way, that direction. So I thought it was interesting how all of them had that theme running through it as well. Recoup the energy that you used for negativity and pour it into purpose and pour it into manifesting your best self.
That theme, I want to zoom in on something specifically now that I learned and took away personally. And what an exciting thing to sit down and be putting together a program to help two personality types that aren't your own. And I sit here, and through each session, I'm like learning so much. And I've got journal pages filled in my personal journal from some of the ahas and some of the learning that I took for a program that's not even designed for me. So that's why I think we really want to sit down and give you some stuff today, because we feel like even if you're not an INFP or INFJ, you can still benefit from some of these principles, some of these ideas. When you talk about this idea of negativity and alchemizing that, I think of so many times, and you listening may have had this experience where you're on a social media platform and you see something that it's like it gets a rise out of you. It's probably going to be negative if it gets a rise out of you, unless it's a cute puppy, which, we share those things too. But something out there gets a rise out of you because of how you're politically or socially or spiritually attuned, and you feel compelled to post it or repost it and get all fiery and really double down on this, what is seemingly a microscopic negative thing, or kind of just a for the day, right? It's not like anything big. It's just today's cycle of outrage or today's cycle of getting worked up about something. I have found myself doing that so many times in the past several years. This is just an example. This isn't what people talked about. This is just an example of where you can find this happening in your life. These little minute things, and you amplify them and you blast them out there and you keep doubling down on it, spreading this energy of kind of this down cycle thing you don't like. You're outraged and you want to repost it. Well, in our interview with Annie, Lalla, she talks a lot about, she's a relationship coach, so she talks a lot about how to create the life that will bring the love of your life into your realm, basically, into your area of connection, and the things you would do to set that up. And she says she talks a lot about how it's premature to think about love until you have self-love, and she talks a lot about how to do that. And the thing she really spoke to me about was this idea of she says, I never make the past wrong. I just don't, because I have a tendency to do that. Like in my world, I have a tendency to do what I call time machining, which I go back and I beat myself up for past decisions I've made, whether it's a week ago, a month ago, 10 years ago, when I was in my childhood. I tend to beat myself up about past choices. And what she said about not making the past wrong spoke to me so personally and so deeply, because I have such a tendency to do that. I have a tendency to go back and beat up younger Joel and make him feel bad about the decisions and the choices he made at the time he made them. And so just as she started to talk about that, I started to reflect on how I do this. And it reframed me. I don't exactly know what hit me at the core of my introverted feeling, but it reframed me to start thinking in terms of allowing that stuff to just go and not focusing and bringing the past that's back there into the now, because I have to experience the past in the now. The past doesn't actually exist. I have to recreate the emotions, recreate the thought patterns. I have to recreate all of that in the here and now. And that causes me trauma. That does what Antonia was just talking about, how it just pulls the energy away from the things that I want to do in life. It puts me into a past-oriented state. So just that alone, that kind of reframe and thinking in terms of that. And that's not as profound as you might say, well, I mean, I already heard this, Joel. Come on, not go back to my past, not beat myself up. Totally understand. In conjunction with amplifying the here and now in your life. And she talks a little bit about this. She talks about going through your life. And I think I sort of tended to do this, but I just got a lot of permission, a lot of encouragement from interviewing her to do this even more, which is to pay attention to the little microscopic things that are so magical about my life. The taste of the coffee in the morning as it first hits my tongue, sunlight streaming through my window, maybe when I get up in the morning. As I go through my day, a stranger smiling at me or opening a door to allow me to walk into a building. And then she talked about how to start attuning these, especially when other people are doing things for you or they're giving to you in small ways. Start to see those as expressions of love from strangers, which I thought was really interesting. Start seeing those as expressions of love from strangers. If you can see somebody opening a door for you at a gas station as you're walking in as an expression of love, and you don't know this person, they were just being a kind stranger, she talks about how much more are you going to notice your partner or your spouse or your lover or your friend bringing you a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. Almost absentmindedly, we just go, oh, hey, thanks for bringing that to me. But if you've been attuning yourself to see love expressions from strangers, there's going to be so many microscopic love expressions from the people that are important in your life that you're going to be able to start to amplify that and to start seeing love from the people that love you all the time, everywhere. That alone started to see, in my mind and heart, a trajectory of looking for the positives. We do this thing with our kids, and we've been doing it for probably about a year now. We call it caught in the act. At dinner each night, at the dinner table, I say, hey, who has a caught in the act today? And basically what it is our children are attuned to say, I caught my brother or sister doing this good thing today. So we're basically catching each other doing things that are right throughout the day. And what Annie talks about in amplifying these little love expressions from strangers, it's kind of like that. We're looking to catch people, not in the negative things they're doing to us, not cutting us off in traffic or letting the door slam in our face, but letting us merge in traffic or opening the door for us to walk into some place. Just little expressions of love from strangers. I wrote that down in my journal, and I've been really mindfully meditating on that concept for the last week, and I want to expand that out because I think that could be really powerful. In my relationship with you, Antonia, if I start to attune myself to how strangers are showing me love, every little thing you do, even when you're maybe, quote unquote, fighting with me or we're arguing, I think if we can hit higher levels of looking at this, I can probably even see those as expressions of love because it's wanting things to be better. It's wanting to calibrate life. It's wanting to add your 2 cents, your involvement, your mindset around stuff. So this is a big aha. And then, so that's one part. And then the other part of this is if you aren't in a relationship, Annie talked about amplifying the expressions in your life that are joyful, all the little micro things. Because if you can start to focus in on all those little magical moments of your life, every little small pleasure, every little small thing, amplify that, because we have a tendency, I think, as humans to amplify the negatives. I'm having a tough time here, and you amplify and make it bigger. Well, what if you put emotional investment and amplification into the good things that are happening? Find the good. Attune your reticular activation system to look for the good stuff in life. You amplify that. She talks about falling in love with your life. You live this magical life now all of a sudden. You start to fall in love with your life. And she said that's really the first step to self-love. You fall in love with the life that's around you, amplifying the little things. Then you start to go, wow, who am I to be living this much of an amazing life? I must be an amazing, lovable person. And then you start to fall in love with yourself. You amplify your life, you fall in love with that, and then you start to fall in love with who you are. You become this lovable creature, this amazing person, and then you start to amplify that. And then it's almost a natural progression for other people to be magnetized towards somebody like that. If you're in love with life, if you're in love with your life, and if you're in love with yourself, you will become magnetic to other people, whether that's friendships or romantic partnerships. That is a really interesting model that she gave, and I totally buy it. That's basically how I found you, Antonia. I was attuning to my life. I was amplifying things in my life. I was falling in love with myself, and then a beautiful, amazing woman came into my life when I wasn't even looking for her. So I know this stuff works, and I think these are just some elements from Annie's interview that spoke to me personally that I personally put down in my journal.
Yeah, she mentioned things like how the sun hits the kitchen faucet and like makes it twinkle. Just like really, really magnifying the mundane. And I got a lot from that too. It doesn't surprise me that the interviews that you got the most out of were from INFPs.
There you go.
Since you're using introverted feeling or authenticity as an ENFP. And I got some of my biggest ahas from the INFJs, and that makes sense too because they're using extroverted feeling or harmony, which is a function that I share. And so my big takeaway and the thing that I learned was a redefinition of the concept of self-care. Because when we talk about self-care, and even I've done this when I recommend that, particularly INFJs and ISFJs, but also EFJs, when we give them advice on how to, to really put themselves in the everybody getting their needs met, that they're part of everyone, and that they need to make sure that they're focused on their needs and to do a lot of self-care. And I admit, in my mind, I saw bubble baths and, glasses of wine and, just moments of sensory indulgence so that they know that they're allowed this. But there were 2 different INFJs that we interviewed that redefined self-care, and they didn't know that the other person was going to do that. So both of them had come to this and separately and talked about how big of a deal it was for them. Betsy Garman, who was one of the INFJs we interviewed, she talked about, self-care not just being a day at the spa. It's about self-knowledge, right? It's about knowing yourself in your inner spaces. It's about deep intimacy with oneself and knowing where your inner boundaries end and begin. Like knowing when somebody's encroaching on you or crossing an inner space boundary where they're getting too far in and you need to assert your boundary. That's a part of self-care. Boundary setting is self-care. I thought that was brilliant. And the other aha that I got was from Daniel Karen, another INFJ that we interviewed. And he defines self-care by its emergent, not by the activities he does. And that is, he knows he's doing proper self-care when he's well-resourced to deal with any of the challenges in his life. Meaning that if he has something he doesn't want to do that day, like it's just a can he desperately wants to kick down the road. He doesn't want to talk to that person and confront them about something, or he doesn't want to write that email, or he's just feeling lazy and doesn't want to go do whatever he has to do, then he knows that he's done proper self-care because he's resourced enough to do it anyway. So for him, self-care was defined by plenty of sleep, really nutrient-dense foods, getting to the gym on a regular basis. He talked about how he's aware of his love language and making sure that he's getting plenty of expressions of that love language, even if it's from strangers. Like if he knows he's a physical touch person and he said, if I know that I'm not feeling loved, I go get a massage. Like I go hug people that I love and I make sure that, I'm doing a lot of hugging because that's what I know I need in order to feel love. And so he uses that awareness and understanding of himself, just like Betsy was talking about. Self-care is introspection, is understanding the things that you need. And Daniel indicated that he uses that understanding and awareness of himself to go get his needs met in a daily ritual. Like again, it's like the idea of giving yourself quarter when it comes to making mistakes, but not giving yourself quarter when it comes to ensuring that you're ready for the world and prepared for the world. So his self-care regime is a daily ritual that he folds into his life to ensure that he's well-resourced. And so now I'm redefining self-care. I'm not seeing self-care as quote-unquote alone time. I'm seeing self-care as the alone time that I need to make sure that I'm resourced enough to go do the things that I need to get done. And so I'm shifting sort of the formula. The emergent comes first. And then if I don't have the energy to do the things I need to do, if I'm not well-resourced, then that's my trigger that says, I've got to do some self-care. And the first thing I do with self-care is figure out, what have I been ignoring in my life? Have I not been getting enough sleep? Am I not getting enough water? Have I not been to the gym in a while? If any of those things are, yes, I have been ignoring this, then my self-care is to immediately address that element.
I also got the same thing around self-care. I think it is interesting how the INFs have redefined it for themselves in the council, the people we interviewed. I wasn't expecting that as much. I was expecting to be more platitude, have some alone time and all this, but that radical redefinition of self-care in a lot of ways, I think that really spoke deeply to me. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I want to talk about one more thing that I took away from Daniel's interview as you were talking that triggered me. This idea of trusting myself has been a struggle my whole life. And you listening right now, you might have struggled with this idea of, can you trust yourself, trust your gut? I think it's been undermined for me from my religious paradigm. I was taught never trust your emotions or feelings, never trust your introverted feeling, right? always trust things outside of yourself, which was the church congregations and the religious structure around me. Don't trust yourself or your own heart. So I kind of got that message growing up, and then I think I've doubled down on it. I've been very mistrusting of myself. Daniel talked about this really big reframe for me. He said, why would we not trust ourselves? We would use the same criteria for trusting ourselves as we would a friend or a family member. He said, how many times do you trust a friend or family member who lies to you? Or they're not directly lying, but they're just not reliable. They don't come through on their word. They say, oh yeah, hey, I'll get you that, I'll return that thing I borrowed from you next Monday. And next Monday comes and they don't return it. And then the weekend comes, they still don't return it. And then they tell you something else. Oh, hey, let's go get some breakfast on Wednesday. And then they cancel last minute. He asked, how long would you see that friend or that family member as reliable if they keep making promises or agreeing to things or giving you their word and then rescheduling or canceling or breaking those promises or just kind of lying that they were going to do something, they don't follow through with it? And I thought that was interesting. I basically answered, yeah, I would, in my mind, I wouldn't trust that person at all. Well, we do the same thing to each other, Daniel talks about. Or to ourselves. We basically tell ourselves all sorts of things we've promised, and then we don't come through. We say, hey, I'm going to send that email tomorrow morning to that person, or I'm going to assert my boundary here, or I'm going to get started on this project, or I'm going to call that person, or I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to get myself to the gym. Whatever it is, we tell ourselves, and then we don't follow through with it. We're a bad friend. We're a bad family member. We don't follow through with our word. And so becoming a slave to your word internally, man, what a reframe to me. I mean, I've had this in my head, but it was some way that Daniel said it that struck me so deeply to say, if I'm feeling lack of self-trust in my life, there are probably little things I'm doing on a daily basis to undermine that in myself. Of course, if I say I'm going to do something and I don't do it, I'm not going to trust myself because I didn't do the thing I said. But if I can become a slave to my word, a man of my word, when I say something, I do it, and be careful what I commit to, that can put me on a path of self-trust as I begin to do little things, very little, small things, and I go ahead and say them, and then I do them. I'm building little self-trust over time. So I've started immediately in all little things now. I'm watching very carefully. When I say something, I tell my daughter, I'll be back in 5 minutes to check on you as I'm putting her to bed at night. I make sure I go back within 5 minutes to check on my daughter. And I'm just trying to connect this to every little thing in life. So again, that kind of comes back to the theme of what Annie was talking about, amplifying the little things. It's going to come down to the smaller things we do every day that build to the bigger themes of our lives.
Yeah, but to bring in, yes, and to bring in the theme of patience with oneself and a lack of perfectionism, I would alter what you said to go from I'm a bad friend or I'm being a bad friend to myself. I would go to being an unreliable friend
Correct.
To oneself. I don't think I would put the label of bad because you also have to forgive yourself for the things that you didn't follow through on. And at the same time, you're forgiving yourself to recoup the real estate that you would be applying to beating yourself up. So you're doing it not just to go easy on yourself, but you're doing it because beating yourself up doesn't do you any favors. Like that's just an energy suck. But the idea of how do you trust your own decision making? How do you make it so that you can rely on the decisions you're making? And you do that by establishing credibility with yourself. You become more rested into and trust yourself more when you know that you're going to follow through. And so, yeah, I would just kind of change that from bad to unreliable. But if you immediately start becoming somebody who is reliable to yourself, and to other people, that's the emergent as well. But it's really about your relationship with yourself. If you start by being reliable with yourself, then you can start trusting your decision making. And even more so, you're building credibility for yourself on the big things because you've already established that you will follow through on the little things. That's the only change I would make there is because I think the word bad is a little too,
it's a label.
Self-flagellating.
I totally appreciate that.
Yeah.
And just like everything, this is like a three-legged race, right? Like as you grow your commitment, your word to yourself, you start to realize all the times you weren't true to yourself, and you're like, oh, I should beat that person up. And you're like, wait, no, the other work I have to do also is forgive that part of myself, my past self. I can't dwell on that, but I can use it as a marker for moving forward. So it's this three-legged race. As I grow one part of myself, it exposes the parts that are falling behind, or the cracks and crevices. I fill that in, and it exposes another part. And it's that patience you're talking about, Antonia, where you're moving forward and it's fits and starts, and you've got to tend to over here, and then attend to over there, and then attend to this part of your life. And they're all interrelated. I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you have a struggle in your life, it's probably going to be related to all the other struggles in your life. Like, all your struggles come in clusters. All the growth you have to do comes in clusters. And so it's not going to be just one thing. It's going to be a bunch of things that we have to do, much like a three-legged race of life.
So I just got a lot from putting this program together. I think that's one of the nice things about putting programs together in general. I got a lot out of the INTX Unleashed program too, and probably more so from that for me personally, because I'm an NT and we were talking to INTPs and INTJs. And so there were a lot of takeaways I got from that program as well. So I think one of the reasons why I love what we do is that I get the benefit in all of these interviews. I get the benefit of all of this learning and all of these reframes and all these ahas from personality types that aren't the same personality type that I am, but still have so much wisdom and insight, particularly anybody who's a high performer, you're going to get wisdom from them. They figured some stuff out, and that's why they're in the position that they're in. That's how they got through all of their challenges. And our recommendation is that if you can, when you find a high performer, find out if they'll let you ask him a couple questions about some of the challenges that they experienced in life and how to get through it, and some of the things that they've learned, some of the learnings that they've taken from the journey. Because everybody's got a journey, but not everybody's journey has been filled with insight and paradigm shifts. And if a person if they're a high performer, no matter what their personality type is, they've probably figured a couple things out. And so I was just really grateful that I was able to get some of those massive reframes and ahas from doing this program.
Yeah, I've found so much value in my life going through life. Anytime I see somebody doing something and have figured something out, I ask them. I'm like merciless. I go like a dog on a bone. I'm just like, tell me how you figured this out. I remember I used to work for this president at the zoo many years ago, and I watched him work a room, and he never got caught by what I would call leeching energy, people like siphoning his energy and just cornering him and taking all his time where he couldn't speak to everybody else in the room. And I was like, I pulled him aside afterwards, like, how are you doing this? What is your technique? What's your tool set? How are you moving through a room and not letting yourself get caught by one person that just takes all the energy away from the other people you want to talk to? So if I encounter somebody like that, I just grill them on how they figured this out in life. So I'd recommend you do the same thing. If you find somebody, particularly somebody that has the opposite co-pilot of your driver. So for example, me as an ENFP, if I can talk to an INFP that's a high performer, and I can ask them so many questions about how they're doing what they're doing, because their driver process is my co-pilot. So if you're an ENTJ, look for an INTJ. If you're an INTP, look for an ENTP. These are great people that you can ask questions to get learning from. Now, this podcast probably, you could look at it as kind of like an infomercial for our INFx Empowered program. And in some ways, it honestly is. Like, we want people that are INFPs and INFJs to go and invest in this program because we believe it'll be powerful for you. And we always try to find ways to bring the learning from our programs into a general, broader audience that you can benefit, even if you're not an INFP or INFJ, because this program was created for them. Even if you're a different personality type, or it's just not the right time for you as an INFP or INFJ, we thought some of these concepts we talked about today could be really powerful for you. And we want you to be part of the community. We want you to be around for a long time because we want to continue to develop products and programs and more podcasts that can help you in your personal growth journey in your personal life, becoming the best version of yourself. And that's really what our hearts and minds are attuned to here.
So tell us what you've learned from people that are a different personality type from you. What are some of the biggest insights you've gotten from maybe just observing them or asking them questions and interviewing them? What are some major ahas you've gotten from people of a different type that you have integrated into your life? And come over to personalityhacker.com, and underneath this podcast, leave a comment. Say what you've learned from people of a similar or maybe even completely different personality type that has really impacted your life.
We're doing a little switch up here today. And if you want to give us a review on iTunes or Goodreads or Amazon for either the book or the podcast, reviews are amazing. Antonia absolutely reads all of them out loud to me and often the team here at Personality Hacker. We love getting reviews of the book or the podcast. It's a way that you can offer what you enjoy about the podcast. And reviews obviously help in rankings and things of that nature. So we'd love to have you come over and give a review. You can also pick up a copy of our book on all major retailers, online and offline, whatever offlines are left. If you have a local bookstore in your area, we recommend ordering it through your local bookstore to help support local bookstores as well.
Okay, I don't remember what you do next.
Well,
if we're going to switch it up.
I'll just say, my name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.